Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, how are my snipers doing today? I hope you guys are doing fantastic. Listen up, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are talking about Turbo, right? We'll be diving into the basics. We'll also be diving into some of the technical analysis. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be talking about where I expect this coin to be heading over the next couple of weeks. Listen, overall, ladies and gentlemen, right? This is very, very important, right? The March candle close, the weekly and the quarterly, they're all happening at the same time. The weekly is ending the exact same time as the monthly and the quarterly. So, we will see how things end up closing. Of course, everything is very, very bearish at this very moment, right? When we even go look, we can see that last week we had a massive, massive rejection candle, right? When we go over here on the weekly, we can see this candle over here was a massive rejection candle. And then, the last few days we have flipped to bearish. Now, I will say this doesn't mean necessarily it's over, right? We did talk about this price point before, but we have to see how everything holds. Overall, when I go to something like Bitcoin, Bitcoin is very, very relevant in this because obviously Bitcoin's ahead of Snake. I don't expect Bitcoin to be heading much, much lower. Worst case scenario, I expect it to be heading roughly around $80,000, right? Maybe downwards of 78,000, right? But overall, I expect things to start turning around with Bitcoin because I believe Bitcoin's, the purpose of this quarterly candle right here is the retest off of this huge, huge pump we had from October, November, December, right? So January, February, March is more of the retest. Now, April still could be a little bit of a pullback candle, right? It could still sweep a little bit lower, right? So we have to be, aware of that possibility. However, overall, we are much, much closer to regaining territory for Bitcoin and coins like Turbo than we are further away. Okay. Um, you know, we like I said, this is this candle's purpose. April still could be a little bit like this, where things could sweep and then start recovering. And if that's going to be the case, obviously that means Turbo would go slightly lower. But in general, I am already looking at prices that I want to be buying coins. I've been, starting to dollar cost average once again, and I will continue to do so until I believe, I was just completely wrong about this cycle. The reason why I still think I am right about this cycle is because Bitcoin dominance still hasn't broke down and, created the roller coaster, right? We do expect to go up to here, right? Somewhere upwards of here, then go down sideways exactly the same way as we did here before we have a big crash. This over here, this sideways movement is going to be the start of altcoins starting to kind of rise up over those couple weeks. And then the big crash is going to be, ladies and gentlemen, the big, big pumps you get over the 4 to 8 week span. Okay. So that is why I'm still super optimistic about Turbo. Now, I know some people are, very pessimistic about it. Obviously, people that are anti-Turbo, anti-meme coins, anti-crypto are having a field day right now. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we will be the victors one way or another, right? One way or another, I do believe, we will have recoveries at the bare minimum, right? At least to somewhere all-time highs. So people that, bought in way earlier have a chance to make a lot of money. People that, bought at the very top have a chance to break even. That is my personal bias of what I believe will happen. Worst case scenario. I don't believe, we're in a bearish scenario, in a bearish environment. Nothing suggests that. Bitcoin is just clearly making higher lows, right? Higher lows to then make higher highs, right? Remember, everyone, always talks about what's happening in the moment. You know, price goes down for something like Bitcoin, everyone says it's over. Price goes up, people say it's going to the moon forever. It's just typical, normie behavior, to be honest. We will look at Bitcoin just for a little bit more before we dive into Turbo, because this is very, very relevant. We do have a gap that is probably going to be forming, um, you know, probably to be forming because we did end here up at 84K and we're already down to, 82,000 at one point. So there's gonna be a little bit of a gap that we are going to have to fill. I had this drawn up from earlier, right? We talked about how we might potentially be going back to this zone, just take out some of the pretty much right? To take some of the liquidity, go back, tap into this big support zone, and before we continue going up, right? So if that's going to be the case, Turbo can push down potentially lower to roughly, nothing too crazy, but we could potentially go to 0.0015. I'll definitely be buying a lot of Turbo then. And just for the people that think, I mean, you guys are probably watching this point, but just for the people that think, I am getting paid to talk about this coin, I'm really not. Um, I would legally have to advise it. Plus, Turbo is not even my biggest holding. It's nowhere near my biggest holding. I have a bunch of other coins that are not meme coins that I'm super optimistic about. So, Turbo is just something I like to cover. I like engaging with the community. It is still my biggest meme coin. So I also, I guess, is just fun to talk about because it's something I could relate to and be, I guess, more emotionally attached to, even though, of course, we all know the purpose of Turbo is, to get us to where we want to go in terms of prices, whether it would be back to all-time highs, creating new highs somewhere, let's just say at 10 cents, 20 cents, 30 cents, whatever the case is, and then we sell, right? I'm never going to be a bag holder. I'm not planning to be a bag holder for next cycle. I am simply looking to just, you know, cash out when the time is right. My personal plan this cycle was just to go from point A to point Z, ignoring kind of what happens in the middle. It's not the most efficient plan, I guess, in terms of making the most amount of money because you could do better and quicker flips. But overall, getting me from point A to point Z is still very relevant. We are currently the 259th coin. We are at 140 million market cap, 16 million volume in the last 24 hours. It is the weekend, right? We did have very low volume, generally speaking, over the last couple of weeks because we are consolidating, and I do believe the reversals are in. So lower volume was expected, and now the fact that this is being recorded, on the weekend, obviously, you know, even lower volume. But it's not concerning because the context is there. It's not like we just simply died. In terms of holders, we have been pretty much going sideways the last couple of days, which is actually pretty good considering Turbo has gone down a couple of percent, which we did talk about, which was expected. So, holders, people still believe, people are not leaving this coin. We still have a 91 bullish sentiment, and I don't think that's going to change at all. If anything, I think we're going to start becoming even more bullish once the price catches up. And yeah, overall, it is looking pretty good. We could go and dive into, other meme coins just for a second, right? For other meme coins, we can see that most coins, like I said, ladies and gentlemen, are still, struggling just as Turbo is. So once again, this is not a Turbo issue. This is simply liquidity just being, flushed out of the market, right? The way you have to look at this is which coin is going to pretty much survive and make it up to the top 10, top 15 meme coins. I believe Turbo is still there. I'm still super bullish on Turbo, and I still haven't changed my, overall bias, right? When it comes to the point Z. Obviously, it's easy for anyone to say, oh, well, this coin is dead if it, comes down to this price point or even lower. But ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, I'm still looking at the bigger picture. That doesn't mean, that doesn't mean I'm always going to be bullish forever. It just means until I see things in the market overall change, then I'm going to be bearish, right? If price is just say somewhere up here, right? Doesn't matter the actual price point, and I see, things like Bitcoin dominance and Bitcoin and everything that already played out go from our favor to start reversing to slowly transition to the bear cycle. Even if price is up here, I'm going to be bearish, right? Some people might be, confused because they might be like, well, how are you bullish down here, but then how are you bearish up here? Because that's how it makes sense. You literally supposed to be, buy low, sell high. Like that's just how it works, right? People joke around, but that's ultimately the truth at the end of the day. And, until, like I said, until I see Bitcoin, fail to create a higher low and Bitcoin dominance, you know, doesn't get shredded yet, there's no reason for me to even believe that everything's over, right? Everything's over. We are closer to the end than we are, towards the beginning in terms of the cycle. I am really excited over the next few months. I do genuinely think somewhere around the summer to early fall is when we'll have our first big altcoin season, and I cannot wait to personally cash out. Let me know what you guys think. I love you guys so much, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Goodbye.